All right, we'll move straight into our next industry area. And I think it's fair to say that while we're all locked up, things still need to get from A to B, food, medical supplies, most importantly, wine. And the ability to transport goods is quite seriously probably all that's kept some businesses, retailers, restaurants and others afloat in this time. So absolutely critical area. We've got two great speakers today, being Peter Anderson and Mark Whitmore. I'll introduce Peter first. Peter's a seasoned businessman with a lifetime in transport and logistics. His career has seen him engaged within both corporate and private entities at senior levels. He's been the Chief Executive Officer of one of Australia's biggest transport companies and now leads the industry, the whole industry, as CEO of the Victorian Transport Association. He's the voice of the transport and logistics industry here in Victoria, with an emphasis on leadership and advocacy. Peter is committed to enhancing the productivity, safety, workforce development and sustainability of the industry in Australia. So very pleased to introduce Peter Anderson to talk to you about the transport sector.
Very kind. Thank you, Daryl, and good morning to everybody. For those that don't know, the Victorian Transport Association represents about 800 employers of people within the industry. It's a registered representative in the Fair Work Commission and in industrial relations. Keeping in mind that the industry is sort of an unknown for most people. It's a dark art, how logistics works and how things suddenly turn up on shelves. And the intricacies and the networks that are involved are very diverse. There's over 40 different sectors within the road freight industry, and they all operate in separate supply chains. They're siloed. They don't really interact very often, but they're very complex in how they complete their roles and responsibilities within those supply chains. The association advocates for the improvement of the environment upon which we operate, and we've been doing that for nearly 118 years in Victoria. I'm not quite that old, but I do remember when computers first came in. I remember Fortrans and Minitrans, and there was only one big computer in Melbourne, based in a university. And I also remember when the first container crane came into Victoria, and that innovation was absolutely paramount to the development of future systems and productivity gains. And that's the sort of processes we're still going on now, generation after generation. But the industry is starting to understand the value of data. And the value of data isn't just about the dollars. The value of data comes forth in communication. It comes forth in being able to put the message out to people, and using technology is most important in any transport business. Whether it be communication, whether it be decision making and understanding your costs, whether it be operational issues and driving safety processes, and even your accounting functions themselves. How do we connect all this information? How do we connect all these responsibilities to make sure that we get an outcome that we can put into a business that actually then makes a margin, makes a profit? We collect data in our business in so many ways in transport. There's plenty of technology out there, and it's wonderful to see how the new technology is coming through in the equipment that we now use. But it's how we connect it through to our business, which is really the hard thing. The industry is still very much a Neanderthal in terms of how it uses data. It does collect a lot of data, but it doesn't know that it's doing it. And there again, how they can best apply data and the way upon which it's put back into the industry is still evolving and growing, and it's very much a raw area at the moment. But there are a lot of decisions to be made. One of the issues we have, of course, is integration of systems. Those that can remember the VHS and the beta system, which system do we want to take? Not quite sure. But the issue there is the fact that that's what's coming up for companies now. I'll give you a quick personal experience in terms of how data has evolved in the transport industry, the data collection. I joined a company called Border Express. It was turning over about $10 million a year. When I left about 17 years later, it was turning over $350 million a year. But there were many factors that were peculiar in particular that led to the business success. Back in '98, we were a small regional-based business. In '99, we decided to go interstate, become a national business. We bought a company called Marsden's, which was very much a ropes and tarps, a very basic business. And those that can remember, we didn't have an issue at the turn of the millennium from 1999 to 2000, when everybody thought all the systems were going to crash and people spent millions trying to protect themselves. We didn't have a Y2K problem because we only had a couple of green screens in a couple of offices on a DOS-based system. By 2003, we had 7 people in our IT department. By 2005, 13. By 2007, 23. By 2009, we had over 30 people in our IT department with developers and programmers. We tried to decide whether we wanted an off-the-shelf IT system to help us collect data, or whether we wanted to develop our own. We ended up going with developing our own. We grabbed a couple of young bright people down in Geelong, and they developed a software system that integrated our accounting, our operation, and our sales processes to allow us to be able to see the business completely from the screens of our offices, not just from being hands-on outside. And the real issue there for us was the fact that after a couple of years, and keeping in mind that we were updating, we were giving them changes to what we wanted every week. They were working pretty hard for us back in those days. And we developed a great transport management system. The issue there was that they said, well, you've done about as much as you can do. We'd like to sell this program to other people. And they offered it to us, first of all. They said, you can have the codes, and they gave us a price, which was, at the time, we thought was a bit high. Unfortunately, 2 years later, after they've been selling this program that we've been developing with them for over 2 years, we realised that our competitors were starting to get a bit more of an advantage over us. So we went back to buy the codes, and unfortunately, it cost us about 10 or 15 times more than what it could have. So, but the issue was that we wanted to develop a system within our own business that we knew we could manage, could handle our 3,000 customers, could handle our 8,000 deliveries a day, and our 400 truck movements, and make sure that as we grew, we were able to handle the capacity. But originally, it was about vehicle scheduling. But really, it's about visibility, transparency, transparency of the process, and accountability. It builds confidence in your business, and it builds a relationship with your customer. And I think they're things that get missed and get looked over, is the fact that you've got to be able to have a predictable service in transport that gives you confidence with your customer. And it's those relationships in business that actually make a business successful. So as much as we want the data, as much as we want the information, we very much want to make sure that our business is sustainable going forward based on what we can do with that data and how we then manage it. We need to tailor our services according to what our customers require, and that's one of the things you can do if you can use your data properly. But technology and data should make a transport business a lot more predictable. It's interesting how manufacturers of vehicles nowadays are putting so much information, so many systems into a prime mover. It's just fantastic to see that they do it mainly to compete amongst themselves, because they're looking for buyers of transport vehicles to actually pick their product over another, keeping in mind that a truck doesn't travel any faster or carry any more than any other truck on the road. But there's probably more technology in a $300,000 truck nowadays than there is in a $300,000 car. And that's how the industry has been willing to adapt and change and take on the new technology. But it is very slow in actually taking up what the technology can do for it and being able to use the amount of data it does collect. Where do we go with outside influences? IAP, Intelligent Access Program, is a great system. The mobile crane industry uses it to enable easy access around the streets and around the roads. But it is about one of the only industry sectors that's using it. But we need to be able to use it in other areas. The heavy vehicle road reform is all about how do we charge trucks on the road differently than what we do now. So more of a distance, weight, and a location reform rather than what we do at the moment with registrations. We've got the heavy vehicle national law, and they focus very, very sharply on fatigue. We could be doing a lot more with technology there. Chain of responsibility is a major issue within our industry, and chain of responsibility means that we need to have those on-road controls to be able to be visible to third parties. So they're just some of the issues from outside the industry. There's some of the regulations outside the industry that we need to be able to use data to better manage our business within, because we're responsible to those systems all the time. I won't talk for too much longer, Daryl, just to give you a bit of time back, but I'm more than happy to answer questions and any interest anybody might have in our industry. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Peter. We might we'll do the questions at the end after Mark's spoken as well, and allow them to come through. But thanks so much, Peter, for those insights into what is a absolutely critical industry at this time. We'll move straight to Mark. Mark Whitmore is the Head of Business Development at Directed. He's got degrees in electronics engineering with honours, Mark, and a Master of Engineering, both from RMIT here in Melbourne. And he served on several boards and is a graduate of the Williamson Leadership Program. Mark's held numerous executive roles over 25 years in the areas of automotive and factory telematics, fleet management, and connected automotive segments. At his company Directed, his focus is providing connected services and business analytics to leading companies, including Mercedes, Kenworth, Australia Post Ambulance, Victoria, and more. And prior to working at Dedicated, he was based in Singapore, where he worked for HIA Maps, developing connected services solutions for DJI, who is the world's leading drone manufacturer, and also Grab Taxi, who are the region's leading rideshare provider. So a lot of experience in different areas of transport and logistics. Very pleased to be able to introduce Mark Whitmore.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Peter. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Just nod. Yep, great. We might just jump into the presentation, please, James. The next slide. Good morning, everyone. Again, look, most of you wouldn't have heard of Directed. We're what's called a white labeled service provider. So all of our products go to market under the brands of the businesses that we support. So you can see on that chart there that we are a unique company in that we support a cross-section of heavy vehicle brands as well as passenger vehicle brands. I'm pretty sure we're the only telematics provider in the world that supports North American truck companies, Asian-based truck companies, and European-based trucks companies, and how they go to market with their connected services programs in Australia. So it gives us this incredible insight into the transport sector globally, and how to shape that story through local implementations. The other thing that it gives us is, I think, a pretty much unprecedented reach into the transport sector in Australia. We have over 1,600 fleet customers that are connected to our system. And so the data that we get and the knowledge that we can learn from that is quite incredible. If you jump to the next slide. One of the things that we did for this presentation was that we thought we would have a look at, take a snapshot of the transport sector data that we were collecting in Q2 2019 and compare that for the same vehicles to the transport data we're getting in Q2 2020. So essentially, we were able to benchmark the impact that COVID had on our transport fleet throughout Australia. And to be honest, I think while anecdotally we all knew that the transport sector had been working harder, we honestly had no idea of the scale of change. And if you think about it for a moment, you can see the numbers there that, you know, the average distance per day that we're seeing across our fleet has increased by 70%. And, just to consider that much latent demand is available within our network of transport, that we can increase capacity to that extent is truly a staggering result. And look, these figures open up more questions probably than what we've got answered here today. Obviously, there's been decreases in traffic, which has had an impact in terms of the number of trips that vehicles are able to complete each day. Potentially, the move towards home delivery has changed the profile so that we're seeing perhaps more shorter trips. So that may also sort of influence the numbers. But even considering all these different variables, the fact that, we've seen such a staggering change in our transport network really highlights just the impact that COVID's had on that sector. Could you just jump to the next slide, please? Yeah. One of the things that it's really shown out is the importance that technology plays in the speed at which organisations can pivot. It's very hard to pivot if you run your business through paper. And one of the great examples that we saw was, organisations that for different reasons had their traditional transport roles interrupted. We had one customer who delivers frozen foods to strip shops. Obviously, with the closure of strip shops, they no longer could undertake those trips. And so what they were able to do using technology was to open up their fleet to be used by other growth areas, which was obviously retail, so shopping, supermarket shopping to home. And so they're able to pivot. And they were able to do that because they'd implemented a technology roaming concept. So they were able to essentially utilise the technology in their vehicles to plug out of their freight management system and plug seamlessly into the freight management system of the retail shopping sector. And I think what that highlights is within our community, there's a lot of discussion about, mobility as a service, and just the fact that we have this capacity to move people around our urban societies through different means and how we best harness that. And that same concept is starting to come through into logistics, in that we have a pool of capability, and those companies that will win out are those companies that recognise that capability is fleet as a service, can be applied to their own business, but in times of change, it needs to be able to pivot and be applied as a pool of capability in other sectors for other solutions as well. Next slide, please. So I guess what are we seeing from our view of the transport sector following COVID? I think the beer industry, I've said from barrels to bottles, we saw that occur, where there was an issue where, the pubs were closed. And so what do companies do? And again, it goes back to what I was saying before about that ability to be able to recognise the capacity of your fleet to deliver items, whether it be for your business or for other businesses. And those companies that already had technology stacks implemented were able to respond faster and adapt their, operating practices and leverage the data as a competitive differentiator in that context. The other thing, and Peter touched on this, is the fact that, I think initially when connected services and fleet management began, it was the domain of the fleet manager or the depot manager. But that is completely changed now, and COVID's only heightened that, is that it's a digital first, every business is a digital business. And it's those businesses that can take that data and process it across all the different functional areas of their business, through finance, through HR, through warehousing. They are the companies that will be the most successful going forward and are the most resilient in times of change. The other aspect which we thought was quite fascinating, if you look at Amazon's story in Australia, it's been one of struggle. They have really wrestled with the retailers have got such a strong hold over, a lot of the product supply in Australia, that it's really stifled the ability of Amazon to grow. But COVID has broken that and shaken that. And we've seen, a 1,500% increase in revenue for Amazon. And that's just one, obviously, online provider. But it has accelerated their entry into the market. It's also lifted all of the others as well. And so we've seen this heightened level of urban delivery demand. One thing that will do, and we're starting to see that, it's starting to fuel a focus on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, because of range and other issues, are very well suited to that sort of hub spoke model. So, heading out for the day to a drop, coming back to base, pick up, out again, pick up. And so, one of the great things out of this we think will come is the growth of the electric vehicle penetration amongst the small delivery fleets. And that's certainly coming through in terms of the activation of connected services through our business. The other area which we thought was quite telling was what happened with Toll. And for those of you that don't know, they suffered a malware attack. That happened right at the height of where they were most stressed due to the increasing, demand through their network. And that just really highlighted that while data is a tool and an asset and is essential sort of competitive advantage going forward, that unless you put in all the effort into security and to be able to, heighten the protection, that your organisation can actually become more vulnerable. So we're seeing an enormous amount of interest on from our sort of deployments around how we, secure items at rest in motion, as well as all the back-end cloud side of it. And I suppose the last point I just sort of add into what we've seen from COVID is I think there's been a really positive momentum change from the community towards the freight industry as a whole. I think a lot of us are frustrated with trucks take up capacity on the road, and I think the tension that exists in that environment has been, to me, diminished greatly. And I think there's been a celebration for the contribution that the sector makes to the community. And so I'm sort of hopeful that recognition will carry forward, and that, we'll start to see an appreciation for, as Peter said, just how important it is to the operation or lifeblood of society. And maybe the last point is that I think data has made trucking cool. I think that, if anyone out there that's looking for a career, I don't think there's a more exciting area at the moment than transport sector and the application of data and logistics to the management of that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark. You're certainly a good advertisement to get people to fall in love with trucks. But I think you make some great points around, and it's one that forms the heart of this, around the ability to pivot rapidly, to transform, to innovate, that we've been forced into. But I'll throw to Tyler to see if we've got some questions coming through.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Peter and Mark. First question that came through, and I believe this was while Peter was speaking. Have you linked any of the geospatial mapping data sets from the Australian Urban Infrastructure Network? They have huge amounts of data that would be valuable for transport system analysis, as well as almost anything else you need to understand with socio-demographics involved.
Yeah, look, the data source and the data sets that are available are used by individual companies. Keeping in mind that geofencing is a major tool in terms of managing your customers' expectations. But it's really about how do you access those on a broader base, and how do they get shared equally, if you like, to be able to create really efficient supply chains. And the issue there is the fact that we've got individual companies doing individual work, and some do some fantastic work. Toll, Infox, they've got some very sophisticated systems, and they use some great information. But the real issue is that how do they then use that by examining what they do on a broader scale, and then taking that into a much more intricate scale within their business. So, yeah, we'd like to think that we get access to a lot more data than what we actually do, as a matter of fact, as an industry.
Thanks, Peter. This next question came through at the tail end of Mark's talk. Do we know the source of the Toll malware attack? You're right, data is making trucking cool.
I believe it was from only what's been reported in the public. It was a Russian-based attack. That's all I know. So.
Thanks, Mark. Another question: can the data tell you where new infrastructure is needed, i.e., to advise government road infrastructure?
Yes, I believe it can be used for that. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
In fact, it's got a critical role to play, I think. Yeah, because the transport network really just shows how communities are breathing, and that really sets the framework for demand, and that sets the framework for planning.
This next question goes to both Peter and Mark. how will digital help me keep my drivers safe?
I can help you with that one. It'll certainly help you with your fitness for duty at the start, and be able to, rather than just have a driver sign off on the fact that they're fit to drive, but actually be able to log their activity overall and measure them, and integrate a lot more other systems into the measurement of how they are really feeling on a day-to-day basis. Plus, you can also better communicate your safety systems and how they operate, and measure those systems and what they're doing, such as near misses in your operation, in your depot operations. So it's really taking it down to the operational level, and we can do that with the technology that's there today.
Beautiful. Thanks, Peter. And this one goes back to you, and I think this will be the last question for this round. Curious to know how many of VTA's 800 members are part of the 1,600 fleets that use directed technologies.
How many of the 800 members are what? Of the
part of the 1,600 fleets that use directed technologies.
I've never met. We haven't swapped databases.
I can certainly say that there would be a significant overlap. Obviously, ours is a national number, Pete's a state number, but I think the overlap would be significant. Yes, it's not just number; it's also number of trucks they have within our data set, but it would be significant. I would have thought. Yep.
Can I just comment on that? And that is that it's one thing about employers having employee drivers and taking on regular subcontractors. They can manage those on a regular basis within their own systems. But what is growing is the number of individual owners, drivers that are working amongst multiple employers over a given period, that aren't necessarily willing to invest in a technology that we know can improve their business activities. And that's a real dilemma for us, a real problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. That's all for questions for now. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, Tyler and Peter and Mark. That some great insights, I think, there in how there is technology available and it's being embraced, and how this pandemic has to a degree forced some businesses to pivot rapidly. It comes back to what Jane said right at the start around bringing innovation, an innovation culture to the fore, to use the technology, to think smart, think differently, and it's pushed some of us. I think this type of transformation applies to many businesses, and many will come out of it needing to do that. So, thank you very much, Peter and Mark.